My name is Elena Martins. I'm 32. And until that fateful morning, I had always believed that my family's love and respect were constants I could count on. But reality has a cruel way of teaching you that the people you trust the most can sometimes hurt you the deepest. That morning, I walked into my father's office, expecting the usual family meeting. Instead, I was met with a cold declaration that would haunt me for years. My father handed the family company to my younger brother, Daniel, my so-called golden boy, and in front of everyone, he looked at me and said, "Alina, you've been just labor all these years. It's time someone else took over." I remember the exact moment the words sank in. My stomach dropped, my hands went clammy, and the laughter of my relatives and the smug smirk on Daniel's face felt like knives twisting in my chest. I had dedicated over a decade to this company, pouring blood, sweat, and tears into it. Every late night, every sacrifice, it was all invisible now, overshadowed by favoritism that had always been lurking beneath my father's so-called love. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to speak, to shout, to make him understand, but nothing came out. My voice betrayed me, or maybe it had always been silenced by this family. I turned, walked out quietly, and in that moment, I made a decision. I would resign. I would walk away from everything I thought defined me, and I would reclaim my life on my own terms. Call to action, hook. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever worked tirelessly only to be told your efforts meant nothing? Stay with me, because this story is about betrayal, survival, and finally, rising above the shadow of favoritism. It didn't always feel like this. Growing up in a sprawling house in a quiet suburban town, I had believed in the fairy tale of family unity. My father, Robert Martins, was a stern but respected businessman, and my mother, Claire, tried to be the bridge between his high expectations and our childish whims. Daniel, 3 years younger than me, was effortlessly charming. From the day he could walk, he seemed to capture attention without even trying. I, on the other hand, had to work twice as hard just to get a nod of approval. I remember one childhood incident clearly. I had saved my entire summer to buy a science kit, hoping to impress my father with my curiosity. Daniel spilled juice on it, and when I ran crying to Dad, he laughed, patting Daniel on the head. "He's just a kid, Elena. Don't make such a fuss." That had been my life in a nutshell. My achievements ignored, my sacrifices invisible, my feelings dismissed. But I worked hard. I believed that one day my dedication would speak louder than favoritism. I climbed every rung of the company ladder, proving my worth not just through words but through results. I saved failing departments, negotiated critical deals, and even put my own ambitions on hold to stabilize the family business when Daniel chased his hobbies. Every board meeting, every late night at the office, I had hoped that one day my father would see me not as labor, but as a partner, as his daughter. And then came that morning. The announcement was swift, almost surgical in its cruelty. Daniel would inherit the company. I was left with a title that carried no authority and a heart full of humiliation. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how everyone in the family, my mother included, treated me differently. There was pity in their eyes, sympathy that felt more like a chain than support. Daniel, on the other hand, basked in the glow of approval, calling me overdramatic whenever I tried to voice my frustration. Friends at work started whispering, subtly asking if I was okay, their pity burning like salt on a wound I hadn't yet begun to heal. And the worst part? The betrayal wasn't just from my father and brother. My closest friend since childhood, Leela, who had promised to always have my back, sided with Daniel. "He's better at handling Dad," she said gently, her words slicing deeper than any confrontation could. "You always did things differently. It's not personal." It was personal. It had always been personal. Every late night, every sacrificed holiday, every ounce of effort I poured into this company, it had been personal, and they had dismissed it with a single sweeping gesture. I retreated into myself. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. The anger would hit first, then the despair, then the question I couldn't escape. Was I really just labor? Was that all I was to my own family? It was during one of these sleepless nights that I remembered something my grandmother once told me. She had passed away years ago, but her words echoed louder than any boardroom praise ever could. Elena, no one can define your worth but you, even family. That night, I decided I wouldn't allow anyone, not my father, not Daniel, not even the people I considered friends, to define who I was. I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't fight in their arena. I would leave quietly, and I would rebuild myself.
Leaving the company was a surreal experience. My father barely looked at me as I handed in my resignation, and Daniel's smug grin felt like a permanent scar etched into my memory. My mother's eyes were wet, but her silence spoke volumes. She had accepted the family hierarchy as it was, and my rebellion was an inconvenience to her. I walked out of the office that day feeling lighter, yet heavier at the same time. Lighter because I had taken back the only thing that belonged solely to me, my dignity. Heavier because the betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. And yet, there was a flicker of hope in that heaviness, a whisper that perhaps my life was about to begin for real. As I walked through the streets of the city, memories of childhood betrayals mingled with the fresh pain of the present. I thought about every boardroom victory, every negotiation I had led, every late night I had spent building a company that would never be mine. And then I thought about the future. The thought of starting anew terrified me, but it also exhilarated me. It was then, as the city hummed around me, that I realized the truth. I had been looking for validation in the wrong place all my life. I had sought my worth in the eyes of people who would never see it, in a family that valued charm over dedication. But I could define my own worth. I could create my own empire, in my own way, on my own terms. And that's when I decided I wouldn't just survive, I would thrive. I would channel every ounce of betrayal, every sting of humiliation, every moment of invisibility into something powerful. I would rise from this shadow not by fighting them on their terms, but by building a life they could never take away. But even as I made that decision, I felt a chill run down my spine. Leaving the company didn't mean leaving the storm behind. Secrets, lies, and betrayals often have a way of following you, creeping into your life when you least expect them. And I had a feeling that Daniel, and perhaps even my father, had plans I hadn't yet uncovered. As I stepped into the evening glow, a message popped up on my phone. It was from an unknown number. You think you've left it all behind. You have no idea what's coming. I froze. My heart raced. I didn't know whether to feel fear or excitement. Something told me that the journey I had just begun was going to be far more complicated than simply walking away. And somewhere deep down, a part of me wondered, had the betrayal ended, or had it only just begun? The message lingered on my screen like a shadow I couldn't shake. Who was it from? And what exactly was coming? I stared at that message for what felt like hours, my fingers hovering over the screen, unsure if I wanted to respond. But the truth is, the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you run. And for me, the past was heavy, tangled with memories of favoritism, manipulation, and a family that seemed to love selectively. As I walked back to my small apartment in the city, my mind drifted to my childhood home. The Martins' estate wasn't huge, but it had the illusion of warmth. Inside, though, it was a battlefield disguised as normalcy. My father, Robert, was a man of contrasts, generous with Daniel, critical with me. My mother, Claire, tried to balance the scales, but her gentle interventions often ended in silence or quiet sighs. And Daniel, he was untouchable, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I remember the day Daniel was born. I was 6, and my parents held him in their arms, radiant with joy. I wanted to feel that joy too, but instead I felt pushed aside. My father had kissed my forehead, told me to be a good big sister, and then he was gone, cooing over Daniel. That pattern repeated itself throughout my life. No matter how well I did, Daniel's existence overshadowed mine. School was no different. Teachers loved him, classmates gravitated toward him, and I was always in the background, the one quietly excelling, quietly waiting for someone to notice. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that recognition wasn't everything, but deep down, I craved it, not just from the world, but from my family. Teenage years were brutal. My father started including Daniel in business discussions when he was just 15, asking for his opinion on minor decisions. Meanwhile, I had already been running small projects for him, putting in hours of research and labor, yet my contributions were barely acknowledged. My mother often whispered encouragement, but whispers can't replace a father's affirmation. I began to realize that approval in my family wasn't earned, it was given to the chosen one. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had made a decision. I would work harder, prove my worth, and claim my place. I threw myself into the family company, learning every department, mastering every challenge, and for a while it felt like it might pay off. My father nodded occasionally, even smiled when a deal I closed exceeded expectations, but Daniel's charm always eclipsed me. Every minor mistake I made was remembered, every minor success of his magnified. I thought that loyalty and dedication would ultimately be recognized. That thought was my anchor. I didn't see the subtle manipulations, the whispers in the hallways, the silent alliances that had formed around Daniel. My so-called friend, Leela, she had been by my side since kindergarten, but when it came to family politics, even she was not immune to the current. It all became clear one night during a late board meeting. I had stayed behind, reviewing quarterly reports. Daniel strolled in, casual and confident. "You don't get why you stress so much," he said, glancing at my notes. "Dad will always favor me. Just relax." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "You're good, I'll give you that, but you'll never be him. Don't you see? He's the golden boy. That's why Mom and Dad fuss over every little thing he does. You're just labor." I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to shout, to throw the papers across the room, but instead I held my tongue. There was a quiet power in silence I hadn't discovered yet, and I let him believe he had won that battle. That night, I cried in the empty office, staring at the city lights beyond the window. Every decision I had made, every sacrifice, suddenly felt like it had been for nothing. But in my tears, I also felt the first flicker of something dangerous: determination. Not just to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I was more than the label they had assigned me. Flashbacks came unbidden. The summer when I had stayed home to care for a sick Daniel while he finished his school project, only for him to take the credit at a family dinner. The Christmas when I had meticulously wrapped gifts for everyone and Dad had exclaimed over Daniel's hastily done package. The birthdays, the holidays, the small victories that were ignored, all stacked like stones on my chest. And then came the manipulations. I began noticing the subtle ways my family had kept me small. Invitations to important dinners came late or were forgotten. Projects I had led were quietly reassigned. And worst of all, my father seemed to delight in reminding me that Daniel had qualities I didn't: charm, intuition, likability. Every word felt like a calculated measure to remind me of my place. I realized then that my resignation wasn't just about leaving a job. It was about reclaiming myself from a lifetime of subtle erasure. Leaving would be my first act of rebellion, my first assertion that my worth was independent of family approval. But the message on my phone reminded me that leaving wouldn't be easy. Someone knew something about me. Someone was watching. Was it Daniel? Leela? Or perhaps someone else entirely, someone who thrived on family drama. I didn't know, but the warning chilled me to the bone. Determined not to let fear control me, I decided to confront my past head-on. I reached out to an old mentor, Mr. Hargrove, who had guided me during my first years at the company. He didn't just teach me business, he taught me strategy, resilience, and the power of knowing your own value. When I met him, I could barely hide the storm inside me. "Elena, you look different," he said, studying me over his glasses. "You've got that fire in your eyes. What happened?" I told him everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the years of being overlooked. He listened, silent, until I had finished. Then he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You've been dancing to someone else's tune for too long. It's time you write your own music." His words hit me like a revelation. I realized that my life up until now had been a series of compromises, each one pushing me further from who I really was. If I wanted to survive this, I couldn't just walk away quietly. I had to be strategic, deliberate, and prepared for whatever came next. That night, I began drafting a plan, not just to rebuild my career, but to reclaim my identity. I would start my own company, something entirely of my creation, something Daniel couldn't overshadow and no one could take from me. But as I mapped out ideas, the phone buzzed again, another message from the same unknown number. "You think you're the only one with secrets? Watch closely, Elena. The past has teeth." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The stakes were higher than I imagined. Someone knew about my life, my work, perhaps even my plans. Betrayal wasn't just behind me, it was shadowing every step I took forward. And then it hit me. Daniel's success wasn't as effortless as I thought. He had allies, people whispering in his ear, shaping my father's decisions, perhaps even orchestrating the company takeover behind my back. Leela's alignment suddenly made sense. It wasn't just favoritism, it was strategy, manipulation. I sank into my chair, my mind racing. How deep did it go? Who could I trust? And more importantly, how could I outmaneuver a family that had spent a lifetime keeping me in my place? As the clock struck midnight, I received one final message for the night. "Elena, some truths are buried for a reason. Are you sure you want to dig?" I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. The storm wasn't over, it was just beginning. I thought walking away from the company would bring peace, but peace was a luxury I had never known in this family. The messages kept coming, each more cryptic than the last, each one a reminder that someone, or everyone, was watching, and that the game had only just begun. I had spent weeks trying to stay grounded, working late nights on my fledgling business idea, reaching out to old contacts, and rebuilding my professional identity from scratch. But the shadows of my past kept stretching into my present. I realized that leaving the family company didn't erase years of subtle manipulation, and it didn't stop Daniel from inserting himself into every corner of my life. The first real confrontation came one Friday evening. I had gone to a networking event downtown, hoping to make contacts for my new venture. I hadn't expected to see him, Daniel, smiling confidently across the room, flanked by some of the same executives I used to negotiate with. His presence was like a punch in the chest. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, calculating. I forced a polite smile. "Networking, same as you, I suppose." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that reminded me why he had always charmed everyone effortlessly. "Networking? You? Elena, you've always been more literal than strategic. Are you sure you're cut out for this world?" Something inside me snapped. For years, I had tolerated his condescension, his smug superiority, and the way everyone, including my own father, worshipped his every word. But now, standing face to face with him, I felt a surge of defiance. "I may be starting behind you, Daniel," I said, my voice steady, "but at least I'm building something real, not inheriting it like a child playing dress-up." His smirk faltered slightly, replaced with a flicker of unease. "We'll see how far your ideals take you, Elena," he said, turning to leave. But before he disappeared, he paused. "Just remember, this isn't over. You might think you're free, but freedom doesn't mean safety." I watched him go, a mixture of rage and exhilaration boiling inside me. Daniel had always been unpredictable, but beneath his charm, there was a sharp cunning I had underestimated for years. That night, I realized the battle I thought I had escaped was far from over. The next day, I found a file slipped under my apartment door. Inside were documents from the family company, financial statements, project proposals, and emails I had never seen. The most disturbing part wasn't the information itself, it was that someone had clearly wanted me to find it. Someone was inviting me into a game I didn't know I was playing. As I sifted through the papers, the picture became clearer. Daniel hadn't inherited the company purely because of favoritism. There had been deliberate efforts, subtle, calculated, that pushed me out. Projects I had led had been reassigned to him at the last minute. Board members had been persuaded to favor him. And the most painful discovery, Leela had sent emails undermining me, questioning my decisions and loyalty to my father. I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. Betrayal had layers, and I had only just scratched the surface. I thought about confronting her immediately, but something held me back. Anger was dangerous. It clouded judgment. I needed clarity, strategy, and patience. A week later, I arranged a secret meeting with my mentor, Mr. Hargrove. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents I had bought. "This is more than family drama," he said quietly. "This is a calculated power play. Daniel isn't just favored, he's being groomed, and everyone around him is complicit." I felt my chest tighten. Even Leela? Especially Leela. People like her don't betray you out of malice. They betray you because it serves them. She's been playing both sides, making sure she stays in favor with whoever holds the power. I swallowed hard. "So, what do I do?" "You survive," he said simply, "and you make your own power. You can't fight this as you have before. Emotions will only make you vulnerable. You need to act strategically." His words hit me like a hammer. I had spent years fighting with emotion, hoping fairness and hard work would be enough. Now I understood. Fairness was irrelevant. Strategy was everything. Over the next month, I started executing a careful plan. I reached out to contacts Daniel didn't know existed, people who had always respected my competence but had been overlooked because of Daniel's charm. I quietly built alliances, establishing credibility and influence outside the shadow of my family. Every phone call, every meeting, every deal was a small act of reclamation. And yet, the messages never stopped. Every few days, I received another cryptic warning. Each one was a challenge, a reminder that someone, perhaps Daniel, perhaps someone else, was testing me. One message stood out. "The truth isn't always what it seems. Look closer, Elena. Look at who really benefits from your resignation."
I knew immediately who it was pointing to. My father. The man who had called me just labor had a vested interest in keeping me small, in maintaining the illusion that Daniel was the rightful heir. But why now? Why had he chosen the company over me after all these years? I decided it was time for a confrontation, not with Daniel, but with my father. I needed answers, closure, and perhaps a chance to assert my independence in front of the very person who had dismissed my worth. I arrived at the Martins' estate one rainy evening. The house was eerily quiet, and I could feel the tension building with every step up the marble stairs. I found him in his study, reviewing reports, oblivious to my presence until I cleared my throat. "Dad," I said, my voice firm, "we need to talk." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "Elena, what are you doing here?" "I'm done with the games," I said, placing the documents on his desk. "I know what's been happening. I know how Daniel was positioned above me, how projects were reassigned, how Leela undermined me, and I want to know why." He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "You always had a flair for drama." "This isn't drama," I said, my hands trembling slightly. "This is reality. You made your choice, and now I want the truth." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Elena, it's complicated. You were always reliable, hardworking. But Daniel, he has what I could never teach you. Presence, influence. People follow him naturally. You follow rules. That's why I called you labor. I wasn't insulting you. I was, well, explaining why the world isn't fair." I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring in my chest. "So after everything, after years of sacrifice, you just handed everything to him?" "Yes," he said quietly, "and you walked away. Perhaps that's the only thing you could do with integrity." His words were both a dagger and a strange kind of validation. I had been right to leave, but the pain of knowing my father had consciously decided I was expendable cut deeper than anything else. That night, I left the house feeling a mix of liberation and sorrow. The confrontation had given me answers, but no absolution. Daniel's shadow still loomed, my family's manipulations were far from over, and the cryptic messages promised that the battle was ongoing. But I also realized something crucial. I was no longer the same Elena who had been dismissed, overlooked, and undermined. I had survived betrayal, uncovered hidden truths, and begun building my own power. And while the storm wasn't over, I had found a strategy, an inner strength I didn't know existed. The next morning, as I prepared for a meeting that could define my future, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was chillingly precise. "You're closer than you think, but not everything is yours to claim." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Someone was watching, someone was orchestrating events, and the true betrayal was still hidden. The messages hadn't stopped. Every day, a new warning, a new cryptic phrase reminding me that someone, or everyone, was still orchestrating events around me. But by now, I had learned to filter fear from strategy, anger from action. I wasn't the overwhelmed young woman who had resigned quietly. I was Elena Martins, a force they had underestimated, and I intended to prove it. I started the day with a meeting at a downtown co-working space. Investors I had connected with weeks earlier were expecting a detailed proposal, and I had spent countless nights refining it. The room smelled of coffee and ambition, a sharp contrast to the suffocating air of my childhood home. As I presented my vision, innovative, independent, untethered from my family's shadow, I noticed one of the investors frowning. It wasn't skepticism, it was recognition. He had been at the company before, and he remembered the brilliance I had quietly demonstrated, overshadowed by Daniel's charm. When the meeting ended, they shook my hand, offering partnerships and opportunities I had only dreamed of. For the first time in years, I felt visible, not in the shadow of a brother or a father's favoritism, but on my own terms. The feeling was intoxicating, yet there was no time to celebrate. The messages, the warnings, the constant reminder that betrayal lingered kept me alert. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find another envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a series of emails, carefully compiled, exposing more than just Daniel's manipulations. It included conversations between my father and several board members, evidence that he had deliberately sidelined me, orchestrated projects to fail under my oversight, and even influenced Leela to subtly undermine my credibility. I felt a storm of emotions, anger, sorrow, betrayal, but also clarity. The realization hit me like lightning.
My father hadn't merely favored Daniel, he had meticulously engineered my exclusion. Leela's betrayal was not about friendship, but survival, and Daniel's effortless rise was the product of carefully laid plans. I could have crumbled under this revelation, could have let anger consume me, but something inside me refused to surrender. I wasn't going to fight this with tears or confrontations anymore. I was going to reclaim my life with precision, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The next morning, I called Daniel. I knew he wouldn't expect me to challenge him directly. He would assume I was still licking wounds, still fragile, still the overlooked sister. But I had changed. "I know everything," I said calmly when he answered. There was a pause on the other end. "Everything? What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to mask uncertainty with his usual charm. "I know about the reassigned projects, the emails, Leela's betrayal, and even Dad's orchestration. I know how you've manipulated the people around you, Daniel, and I know the company isn't yours because of merit, it's because you were chosen. But here's the truth. Your victory doesn't define me anymore." He was silent. For the first time, I could hear hesitation in his voice. You're bluffing, Elena. You don't have the influence to fight this." "I don't need to fight you," I said. "I'm building something better, something I own, and when I'm done, it won't be about beating you. It'll be about thriving without anyone's approval." That silence on the phone was electric. He knew I was serious, and for the first time, I felt a sense of liberation stronger than any fear or resentment. Over the next months, my business grew. I launched projects, secured partnerships, and built a reputation for integrity and excellence, something Daniel could never replicate with charm alone. Investors admired my resilience, colleagues respected my strategic mind, and friends who had doubted me now came seeking guidance. I was finally in the high I had imagined when I first walked away from the family company. But the shadow of the past lingered. One day, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Leela. She looked nervous, almost vulnerable, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had once undermined me. "Elena," she began cautiously, I owe you an explanation." I leaned back, studying her. "Go on." She swallowed, wringing her hands. "I was scared of Dad, of Daniel, of losing my place. I made choices I regret. I never wanted to hurt you, not really. I thought aligning with Daniel was the only way to survive." I stared at her, measuring the truth in her words. "And now?" I asked. "Now I want to make amends. I want to help you if you'll let me. I see what you're building, and I want to support you, not sabotage you." I paused, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and caution. Betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it had also sharpened me, made me recognize the value of loyalty and strategy. "We'll see," I said finally. "Trust isn't given, it's earned." The ultimate confrontation with my father came later, at a family gathering I was reluctant to attend. I wasn't going for validation, I was going for closure. "Dad," I said, standing tall, "I need to say this. Your decisions have consequences. You called me just labor, overlooked my dedication, and favored Daniel at every turn, but I'm no longer the girl you dismissed. I've built my life, my business, and my future on my own terms. That power, that respect, I didn't inherit it, I earned it." He looked at me, a mixture of pride and discomfort in his eyes. I see that, Elena. No, Dad, it's not about seeing, it's about doing. You taught me strategy, resilience, and the consequences of choices, even if you didn't mean to, but my life isn't defined by you anymore." That moment felt like a liberation ritual. I wasn't seeking forgiveness nor validation. I was reclaiming my identity from a family that had tried to define it for decades. In the months that followed, my life shifted dramatically. Daniel continued in the family company, my father aged gracefully into retirement, and Leela proved to be a loyal ally. And me? I thrived. My business grew, my confidence soared, and the trauma of being just labor transformed into the fuel for my success. I no longer sought approval from people who could never give it. I sought fulfillment, strategy, and growth on my own terms. I also learned the most important lesson. Betrayal is painful, but it can teach you clarity, strategy, and resilience. Not everyone in your life will see your worth, and not every victory will be recognized by those who matter least. But when you honor your own path, build your own empire, and set boundaries, the satisfaction is unparalleled. Betrayal is cruel, especially when it comes from those we love most, but it also reveals who we really are. My journey taught me that worth is never given, it's earned, defended, and reclaimed. And sometimes walking away quietly is not weakness, it's wisdom, the first step toward freedom. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this? Have you ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by the people who should love you most? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you found your own strength.